All right. Now I'll call the meeting to order here at 8:04 a.m. Nathan will be up and on in just a second. We got a lot to go over. The first item is the Q2 budget report, which was sent out. So I'll pass this off to you, Katie, for kind of an overview.
So there is a copy of the Q2 operating budget financial report in the folder for today's meeting. December 31st, 2025 marked the close of the second quarter for fiscal year 26. The report is organized in a similar fashion to previous reports, where we have included a memo that provides some contextual information in regards to the fiscal year 26 budget and some of the budget realignments that we've talked about at previous meetings. And then after the memo, there is a financial exhibit that shows the actual numbers. The financial exhibit is organized as it's been done previously, and that's by cost centers. And then it's further broken out by salary expenses and general expenses. So the first part of the report, there is information about the federal grant applications. And so that is included in this report because when the fiscal year 26 budget was originally presented and then shown in the Q1 report, we were allocating those federal grants in a way that we had done previously, and that was to pay for a majority of the salary expenses for instructional assistants. After the Q1 report was completed, we finalized the federal grant submission, and in doing so, we adjusted the grant so that it is primarily now covering the cost for contracted services expenses and not instructional assistant expenses. So I just really wanted to provide that information because there is a shift there in the budget. It is within the same cost center, so it doesn't necessarily, it wouldn't necessarily need any action from the school committee to approve that, but I just wanted to acknowledge it because it was a difference just in reallocating expenses from salary line to a general expense. And so you have some information in your report about that. And the overall budget impact was $1 million. And again, that was just a shift between salary and expense under the special education. In November, we also discussed some of the work that was done at the Tucker Elementary School, which was a result of the action plan presented by the principal and assistant principal over at Tucker. And so I just wanted to provide further information on the reallocations that were previously discussed and then memorialized in the Q2 report. So you can see we did have to allocate some additional funds for the Tucker salary line, which was reallocated from a district salary line. And then let me see. So it was Tucker salaries. And then there another piece of that too was increasing the assistant superintendent of teaching and learning from 1.6 FTE to a 1.0. So all of those reallocations you can see are shown at the bottom of the first page of the Q1 report. So those are the updates to the actual budget portion of FY26. And then further in the report, there is information on expense tracking. So we're about 30% through paying out salaries for the fiscal year. I tried to provide some information on some of the areas that we have been over budget historically. And one of the cost centers that we've talked about frequently in the past was that substudent extra duties cost center. So if you remember, substitutes and extra duties had been funded at about 500,000 to 700,000, but on the budget side, but the expense side it had been running much higher. And so that was one of the areas where historically we had run a structural deficit. And so we worked really hard for fiscal year 26 to address that structural deficit and make sure that the budget was reflective of what we were anticipating the expenses were going to be. I wanted to share the information for this year because we're actually at this point running the expenses are coming in under budget, which I think is a good news story. And there's been work that was done not only to realign the budget, but also to focus on the work of being able to cover the classrooms in the event that teachers are absent in a way that is being mindful of the budget. So making sure that we're utilizing our resources in a way that we're being mindful of the budget and that we're not going to budget as it relates to church. So what that means is hiring daily subs, trying to make sure that we have kind of a larger pool of daily subs, really trying to advertise that work through the new time and attendance portal that we have. So making sure that the work that we're doing throughout the year and recruiting and retaining some of those daily substitute positions is helping to ensure that we're staying within budget. So you can see that we're projecting to have a little bit of a balance in that account, for this fiscal year. That line is, it's going to change, right? So that is a projection based off of what we've spent so far this year, and then also looking at the history of what we spent last year, knowing that it's cold and flu season and people may have to take some time. So that's something that we'll closely monitor as the year progresses. But I just wanted to provide that information because that is something that we've historically gone over budget in the past.
Could I pause and just reemphasize that point? So
of course you can.
When we started together in June, it was very clear that from the school committee's feedback that line was one problem that we needed to investigate and not only talk about the revenue side of it, but talk about the expense side. So we actually had meetings with the principals and the principal at the school where it was more of an impact than the other schools. Came up with a strategy. HR, Laurie Dunn. We had 3 hiring phases where we brought in building subs and regular subs, daily subs that we hadn't really had in the past to really attack that problem from an expense side. And Katie did a nice job of using some of the revenue from the override, but also some of the revenue from the 9 positions that we didn't fill in order to backfill the spots of the budget that were not fully funded. So that's I just want to emphasize Katie's good work on not only identifying the challenge and the school committee identifying the challenge, but looking at it from a revenue side and an expense side. We attacked it from both sides. Also, the reduction of the positions that were the lack of filling positions has really created flexibility in order to align resources this year where we see the need to redirect those resources to things like the issues that we want to support at the Tucker School, the plan by Principal Celeste Hoag that we already did, and also bringing on a full-time assistant superintendent as opposed to a 0.6, which we feel is really important in driving the instruction in the district. So the ability to make hard decisions in the summer has created flexibility to put the funds where we need them in order to make the overall budget work. So I want to just thank Katie because we came off a hard budget year last year. So fortunate to have an override that supported a lot of this revenue to fill the holes in the budget, but it also took some within the school department budget funds. We generated our own money by not filling decisions in order to do so. Thank you for Katie for the mechanics and the technical parts of all.
The other thing I want to just mention, another piece of this report that's really important to recognize is the fact that in the Q1 report, because it was so early in the year, we did not include a projected encumbrance for salaries. So the Q1 report was just included expenses that were incurred up until September 30th. It did not include any projections for what the salary expenses were going to be for the remaining 3 quarters. The Q2 report includes encumbrances for both the salary expenses and the general expenses. And what that means is in the Q2 report, we are projecting and including information in those salary accounts. We are factoring in what we're projecting or anticipating our expenses to be in the salary accounts for the remainder of the year. We tried to factor in what the expenses will be for some of those accounts that vary. So it includes projections for salaries that are more predictable and easier to calculate, but it also includes expense projections for athletic stipends, for co-curricular stipends, for the substitute coverage that we just talked about. So all of that information is contained in the report. It will change, so it will vary over the course of the next couple of months, just depending on some of the changes that happen as kind of like typical business operating a school. But that information is projecting out and does give us a better sense of where we'll close the fiscal year. So I thought that was really important to mention because that is just a change and an update in the Q1 report. So along with encumbering and projecting out the salaries, we also encumber and project out what some of the general expenses will be for the remainder of the year. That includes transportation. We included an encumbrance for utilities. So utilities, we typically don't encumber. We typically don't do a projection in the reports. We did it in the Q1 report. So that it is something that is included in this Q2 report. And I think that that's important because that's a huge piece of it's a huge piece of the budget and it's a huge piece of the facilities expense. And so in order to do that, we looked at what we've paid so far. So with utilities, it typically runs in arrears. And then we looked at how much we spent last year to give a sense of the comparison. And then we also looked at what are our outstanding expenses and what are we anticipating that we'll have to spend over the course of the next several months leading up to the close of the fiscal year. So that information is contained in the report. We're also encumbering and tracking any out-of-district tuitions that we need to pay. We've done projections for any graduation expenses. We know that there are certain expenses that may come up that are just contracted services expenses at the end of the year, just based off of some of the history of seeing kind of the timing of when those expenses hit the books last year. And so all of that information we tried to encumber as much as we could in this report. So you can see information for encumbrances too. On the general expense side, one of the areas that I just wanted to call attention to is there is an encumbrance right now on general expenses for the ELA curriculum. So we're currently in that review period looking at different options for the new ELA curriculum. We haven't received any of the cost information yet. So that encumbrance or that projection is really just a hold to say we know that we will have an expense. We don't have the exact number of what that expense will be, but we know that that is something that's going to come up in the last couple months of the fiscal year. And we want to make sure that we have that money earmarked so that it's available to us that we can move forward with that purchase. There's been so much work that has gone into the ELA curriculum review, and that entire team has been working on this, I think, for a pretty significant period of time. So it's really important that we do our part from the budget perspective, saying, okay, this money was that line was created in the budget in fiscal year 26, and that money is going to be spent in fiscal year 26. So that's included in here too. And then we'll just continue. There are, on the general expense side, of course, areas that we have to track closely. We've had a few different expenses for facilities that hit for this fiscal year that were unanticipated and unbudgeted. And all of that information from a finance perspective is included in the financial reports. We had, I think it was in July, a pretty significant expense tied to the elevator at Tucker. And then we also had a significant expense for the hot water heater over at Cunningham Polycott. So those are just examples of things happen, and we don't know that they're going to happen, but we need to make sure that we can make those adjustments and just be able to make sure that we have the funding available to react to any of the issues that may come up from a facilities perspective. So right now, the total projected balance for the operating budget is $26,000, around 26, I think 277. And that is projecting pretty minimal utilization of the revolving funds. We are taking into account any of the federal grants that we are allocated for this year. And then that is using a piece of the reimbursement that we're using for this year, but it is not using any significant revenue from any of the revolving accounts, which we had done in fiscal year 24-25. So that will continue to change as the fiscal year progresses. But right now, we're just trying to use minimal amounts of those full revolving funds in an effort to kind of keep those balances full so that those accounts can remain solvent. And the next quarterly report will be the Q3 report. It will be similar to the Q2 report in the way that we'll continue to project out salaries and any general expenses. We'll have any updates for some of the shifts that may have happened in the months of January and March, and we'll present that report during one of the meetings in April.
Thank you, Kate, very much.
Questions from members? Stop sharing just so I can see Nathan. No, Nathan. You're on mute.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. Katie, thank you for that overview and for the report. It was really useful. I have two questions and a comment. Is it okay if I just kind of run through those, Mark, real quick?
Yeah.
Katie, just a clarifying question on the tables at the end. There's a column called FY26 funds committed, and I'm interpreting that as like the remaining amount that's encumbered for the rest of the year for those lines. Is that correct?
So the funds committed is the total of what we've spent in the expenditure column, and then what we've encumbered or what we're projecting that we're going to spend. So it's just the.
Okay, that makes sense. And then just, you made the point that we have about $26,000 kind of unallocated left in the budget for the rest of the year. Putting aside, I don't know, I guess all things being equal, do you as a general practice try to drive that number, that funds remaining number for the grand total, as close to zero as possible as a general practice? Like, do you want to see most dollars allocated, or would it be nice to have that number be more than $26,000? I can't tell if it being $26,000 is the goal, or if that is an indicator that things are very, very tight. I know things are very tight, but
So as a practice and what I've done historically, the report is representative of the expenses that we've already paid for, and then the expenses that we know that we will need to operate the school district for the remainder of the year. And it's those expenses that are projected are reflective of the expenses that we had built into the budget when we built the budget last year, when it was approved by town meeting. And then when we looked at it this summer to say, okay, we had a few people retire, we hired a few positions, we had to move a couple things around. We had a few people that left and we didn't fill those positions and we reallocated. So as a practice, what I try to do is just reflect that in the report, see what the ending number is, and then if we have $26,000 left at the end of the year, I typically don't just spend that down for the sake of spending it down. I would return that money back to the town to say that's funding that we didn't need for a number of different reasons, and that money can go back to the town. It will be certified as free cash, and then the free cash, in a way, will come back to us through capital funding, through being able to go into potentially a stabilization account to be reallocated to the school department. So that's kind of the practice that I've always used.
I think clarify Nathan's question. I don't want to speak for him, but I did a similar question, which is, I understand all of that. I think the question is like, if, let's say, another hot water tank busts and you have to spend $70,000, that's an unanticipated cost because you've encumbered all of your anticipated costs. That's obviously more than the 26,000. Is there some anticipation of those unexpected costs in there, or is at that point is the mechanism for supporting the school budget to start to utilize some of the chargebacks within the revolving accounts? Like what is that?
Sure. Yep. So originally in the budget, we had put a utilization from the building rental account to be able to offset the cost of utilities. Right now, we're not using that whole utilization, so we could potentially use that money in building rental to cover one of those expenses. So I think that there is some flexibility having those accounts, because if you need to, you could use them, but it just impacts, there's always going to be an impact to what funds you have available to you for next year.
Yeah.
So if something does come up, that's something that I think it would be appropriate to talk about it at these meetings to say like, okay, something came up, it wasn't anticipated, we know we have to pay for it. What is the mechanism to do so? And what is the impact going to be for next year?
Got it. That's helpful. So what I'm interpreting from that $26,000 number is it's a signal of two things. One is you all have accurately, like the fact that it is basically zero as a fraction of our budget, you've accurately budgeted and allocated the funds to the things we budgeted for. That's one signal. That's also a signal that there is zero flexibility. The fact that it is zero means there is zero flexibility in that budget. So not if, but when something happens, we'll have to make some hard choices. The comment I had, just going back to the discussion around the substitutes, I'm really glad to see progress there. It's basically generating right now forecasting a surplus in that line. If we go back to, basically before the school year started, when John, you and Katie were thinking about what roles to hold back on, where to invest, One of those investments was in an HR manager. And I think it would have been reasonable, and maybe you got this feedback to say, hey, at a time of tight budgets, why are we spending money on a role we don't currently have? We should just like put that toward the bottom line. I think Milton has long needed an HR manager. It's got several. Milton Public Schools has several hundred employees. It's you have to have a role. You have to have a professional like that on your team. And it actually shows where I'm sure there were, I think, John, I heard you tick through multiple factors that have led to better performance on the subline. One of them is having someone in charge of staffing. And so I think that is an illustration of sort of making a smart investment that pays dividends. And just, I think it's instructive for the work that's in front of us, is we have to make a bunch of hard choices. There may be times where spending money over the long term has financial upsides for us, like in this case. So I just want us to keep thinking creatively around that, and grateful that you pushed for that role.
I had a question about when we're looking at the the expenses, where does the stipends come for the coaching, the extracurricular? Because that was a place that where there was sort of a big jump. And I guess so the question is, where is that? And then how are we how has that been looked at differently this year in order to not have a surprising end? So kind of what's been put in place.
So the all of the stipends for the clubs and activities, extracurricular, and also for the athletic coaches is in the athletics and student activities cost center. So which is under Milton High School. So in that account, we had looked at making adjustments to the extracurricular line to make sure that we would be able to cover all of the clubs and activities. We also are working closely with the principal at Pierce Middle School and also the principal at high school, just so that they're aware of what the budget is and that they know that we can really only run the clubs and activities that we can support the stipend payments with the budget that's already established. So I think it's been it is a work in progress, but definitely making sure that they're aware of the budget and that there's only so many clubs and activities that we can potentially set the budget. Similar with athletics and the coaching stipends, we have more historical, or I have more historical information to say, okay, what is the history of the sports that we've run each season, and then making sure that we have good visibility into that so that we can project out what those payments will be for the rest of the year. The one area that looks to be under athletics and student activities is under the general expense line, but that is somewhat of a result of just trying to figure out which expenses will hit the operating budget versus which expenses are hitting the revolving account. And so we're still making sure that we're working through figuring out kind of what goes where. So there may potentially be an opportunity to shift some of the general expense expenditures from the operating budget to the revolving.
Can I just add to that? Those meetings are really important. Katie and I sat with the couple times in August and September to get ready for what fall season meant, what the winter season meant, and what the spring season meant, to really be sure that these are the stipends that you have available. This is the amount. this is the budget. Very clearly pointing out that we will, that this is all the money we have to spend on this. There should be no surprises. The only surprises from athletics should be any equipment needs that we didn't anticipate. Or fortunately, if we have a lot of teams make the tournament, which we hope we do, there's transportation costs that will pop up, but there should be no surprises about the stipends part of that. They were thankful to be able to sit down and actually have a conversation about the parameters of their budget and what they could spend, they couldn't spend. That didn't seem to be happening prior. And also the same with clubs. These are all the clubs that we offer. These are what the children, the students want to do. But there's a fence around that. This is what we have to collect. This is how much we can spend. This is what we're going to communicate to the teachers who run the clubs. And this is the agreement with how we run the clubs. So really being clear about the budgeting part of that, which I think it's been very, very helpful. So all that has been openly discussed and planned for back in the fall.
Is a big piece too is the transportation expense for athletics is shown under the athletics cost center. Transportation, we have a multi-year contract with First Student. The contract, we're in year one of a multi-year contract. And I believe next year that contract is going up by 8%. It went up a significant expense a significant amount this year. And so that was a large part of looking at athletics too. And just there's when the teams do well, it does add an expense that we weren't necessarily or didn't necessarily. So some of that volatility that we see in that one, but the transportation for athletics is under that athletics cost.
Any questions? Yeah, I want to be mindful of time, so I'll try and keep my comments short here because I know we have 27 things to discuss. But overall, I appreciate the report. Glad for the good news. I think to Nathan's point, it's me appreciative of the work that was done with the recasting that y'all did kind of in August around looking at FY25 expenses, where we're going to be at FY26 budget, deciding not to fill some vacant positions and provide flexibility because it appears from that $26,377 number. We needed that flexibility and that to good use to make sure we're staying within our means within the current year. So that's great. Appreciate you flagging the substitute line to Nathan's point. Again, I'm also glad that number has gone up and up and up over the last several years. It's see that petering off, if not dipping, is great. So thank you all for your work on that to try and control those costs. Seeing us continue to do that in future years and for the rest of this year. Other areas that I think we've raised as concerns previously, transportation, we've raised concerns that have been concerns. Transportation, that line looks pretty close. It's a $9,000 deficit currently out of 800,000. So that's essentially right on target. That is great. Special education has been a place that continued to go up year over year, and we were over budget the past 2 years. That appears to be kind of slightly under budget projected for this year. So those just are the areas that my eyes went to, given those have been historical talking places and all those much better places. It's a lot of credit to community again. I'm sure when you developed this budget last year, we talked about how we are adjusting budget lines to reflect expenditure showing here. So appreciate 3 places that just seemed like we're slightly over. And again, the overall budget, we are in a good place with this questions. Operating maintenance, I think that was related to the things you hit on, which would be unanticipated elevator and boiler hot water heater expenses. Is that generally fair? Is there anything else to discuss on that one?
That's it.
Okay. The other one was the MHS. Looks like the salary line on MHS with the professional line was significantly a bit kind of higher than what was budget. Anything 174,000 over on the $9 million budget. Anything in particular that's driving that?
So we have a handful of employees that are currently being charged the MHS professional line. That when we created the budget or the funding for those employees were allocated to other areas. One of them being special education. So if you look at the special education's professional salary line, there's a surplus there. So that is, I think it's 200,000. So there's one employee that it's a matter of just shifting from one cost center to another. And then there are two employees that are in the instructional leadership line. Their budget is in instructional leadership, but they're based at the high school. And so their expense is hitting the high school line. So I think that that is more reflective of cleanup, almost where the employees live as a matter of like an accounting exercise rather than we haven't hired anyone new. The budget was pretty much on target with what we were projecting out. So I think that is a matter of just kind of going through saying, okay, the budget when we originally created it had these employees assigned to instructional leadership, and we just need to do a little cleanup there. So that stood out pretty significantly to me as well. My concern was, of course, for this year, but my concern is always for next year too, because our budgets should always be building on each other. And so that's something I can look into more and make sure that we clean it up and verify for next year. But I think, again, that's just more of a internal accounting exercise rather than an expense issue.
Yeah, I mean, total salaries, you're right on it. Yeah, moving the surplus. So
yeah,
it's great.
Yeah.
Excellent. Nathan.
Thanks, Mark. I just had two clarifying questions. First, well, maybe I'll start with Katie, the point you just made. I just want to make sure I'm following. So there's the overage at the high school is at least in part attributable to essentially a couple of staff who are geographically based at the high school, but their duties are district wide. Is that right? And you're gonna sort of at some point go in and clean up that allocation.
Mm-hmm.
And then so if they were properly classified, they would go into the one of either the district or the district administration lines.
Correct.
Do you know where they would go? I'm just curious, like if we took a couple $100,000 from the high school and moved it into one of those lines, what it would do to those actual lines.
I believe it's the instructional leadership line.
57,000.
Okay.
I mean, I think all if we're moving the stuff between salary lines for any of them, that's why I went to the bottom line.
Yeah.
Totals like the total salary. There's some reallocation between cost centers. At least the total salary is currently under budget projected or on the year. But yeah, I think as
one is definitely special education.
A savings, district administration. I mean, instructional leadership has a little savings, and then district also has a savings.
Okay. All right, that's all. It seems like it would. I mean, the bottom line salary number wouldn't be affected. It seems like potentially, even if you smooth out that overage in one line and push it into a couple of other lines, it might create or exacerbate overages in those lines. So something I'm noticing. And then Mark, I wanted to make sure I was following. You were talking about maintenance and repair being over. Are you talking about were you referencing the contracted services line?
No, sorry, it's the operations and maintenance, which is below nursing and above special education on the last page.
Yeah.
And that line is overall about $271,000 over budget, most of that being in the contracted services.
Okay, great. No other questions there. I just want to make sure I was tracking the data you were looking at.
In that contracted services line, that's where we have expenses for utilities, any of the expenses for some of the work that happens for any of the facilities, and that is where we would pay for the service for the elevator. There's a variety, and then the consolidated facilities team always encumbers the expenses for the entire fiscal year. So we work pretty closely with Tom McCarthy and his assistant Diane, just on an ongoing basis to look at those kind of open purchase orders that they have for the remainder of the year to see, do those look like they're appropriate? Do we need to adjust them? Typically, we end up adjusting them down a little bit based off of what we think the need is for the remainder of the year. But that process usually will happen kind of in February, March, and April. So that number, that overage or deficit in the contracted services line will definitely be adjusted as we look at kind of those pending payments that we'll make.
In our discussions with Nick and Amy, generically, we talk about potentially talking about consolidated facilities needing some sort of a emergency account that would be for the town and the schools in order to respond to significant repairs that come up in the middle of a year that aren't budgeted for, and so like it just might help that department move forward without impacting anybody's budget. If the water heater went at the police station or an elevator went in another building, you'd want to be able to have somewhere to grab that money that didn't impact the annual operating budget for the facilities department. So just something to think about moving forward.
Anything else on quarter two? Not, let's move it along. Thank you very much, Katie. Last thing on quarter two, do we need to, obviously only vote on our agenda today, so we can't, but do we need to vote on anything related to the, I thought we needed to a formal vote for any reallocations coming out of quarter two. Is that something we have an upcoming finance meeting to have on upcoming school?
It would be great to put a vote next to the quarter two report that's reflective of those changes. We were going to try to use this report as that mechanism to be able to do both at the same time. So we can put vote on it for next week, and we can put vote on the next school committee meeting, so it's there.
Go to that for our next. Old business, discussion of budget timeline. There's a lot here on budget stuff. One thing I wanted to try and address quickly, I'm not sure about folks' availability after 9 o'clock. So we got some things, but we got an email from the warrant committee, school reps just yesterday asking me tomorrow night. So obviously posting issue with that if all three or even two of us wanted to attend that with them. So we can't do that. One thing we could do, given this is kind of an initial meeting, would be to have one of us attend that, share with them kind of the information that we discussed here, and take any initial questions they have to bring back to the group. I also late notice, so I wouldn't want to commit John or Katie to that either. So I assume it really would just be kind of one of us, kind of 1-on-3 with those members, just to have the initial hello. What are the questions you have coming out of, because we shared the committee recordings and hopes that hopefully they watched it by then. But that is a strategy. I just don't want to, and I'm happy to take that time and do that, but don't want to have that if folks would like to be at that meeting. If so, we'll need to email them and try and schedule that throughout future week.
I'm fine if it's one. I mean, if it's easier to get this scheduled now and have an initial meeting, it's one of us and then have scheduled any kind of follow-up so that we can get it on the agenda. Okay. Was there, Nathan, how you feel?
Yeah, same. I would not be able to make it tomorrow night anyway. So Mark, if you're available and willing to take that meeting with them, I definitely appreciate that. If you got other stuff going on, happy to look at a different day, but it would help keep things moving along.
Okay, if you're,
Can two of us attend?
it's a quorum of this
Oh, of the
subcommittee.
subcommittee, right.
So,
Yeah, no, so I'm fine with you. If you have the time, if not, then we can reschedule.
okay, I'll let them know. Again, my goal of that will just be to mostly kind of gather questions, try and then schedule some future meeting times where all of us can be there. But gather at least some initial questions, maybe action items that they're looking for us. So we can, as you say, Nathan, keep pushing this process along, given we are behind from our calendar. Great. So that's kind of coordination with the warrant committee. Want to have a discussion of our ongoing coordination with the select board. We've been multiple conversations. We've been having members of the select board as well as the town administrator around FY27 budget. Some of that came out of the budget coordination committee like yesterday. Some of that has been ongoing in terms of one-off conversations. We want to start with kind of what you are hearing. I think like the things we talked about last week in this of the advocacy with trying to reduce the $2.1 million worth of level service cuts that the select board and town administrator has asked of the schools. We talked about increasing use of the operating stabilization fund. Is that something they would be open to in order to reduce? We talked about conversation with them about changing the vision of the impact of the revenue gap that the town has, the $2.5 million revenue gap the town has. We're currently allocating 84% of that to 16% of the town. Those are the two things we talked about last week to try and advocate for. We've kind of maybe moving on one of those, not moving on the other. But John, do you want to provide any update on that?
Sure. Last week, Katie and I met with Nick and Amy a little bit amount of time to talk about some strategies in order to support the school budget for FY27. It was a very good discussion. I think we all kind of creatively looked at the issue, challenges of the schools. That was followed up by a discussion with Nick as he was ready to present at the select board's finance meeting on Friday morning of last week. A lot of this was unpacked yesterday at our budget meeting on Milton, the name of that
Budget coordination
committee meeting, where the FY27 discussion came up. Basically, the work that we're doing with Nick is he's trying to support some insurance work. He has some debt that he feels he can realign to save money, and how in fact can we provide, or can the town provide an influx of resources to the schools in order to support FY27. So on our plate is we are talking with our internal folks about charging our insurance for food service to the food service account, which has a balance that could withstand that kind of cost. That is a revolving account that we cannot use for any other purpose but food service unless we support that account. So having them pay their insurance would allow the insurance number for the town to go down, which would be an indirect and positive impact to the schools. They also offered, can we support you with any one-time funding for some of your revolving accounts that have been reduced significantly over the last several fiscal years? We obviously said yes, we'd be open to that. That would mean that money would come from the town in a one-time manner to the circuit breaker account, which remember is recommended to be at about $3.1 million, and it currently has about $4,000 in. So any infusion into that account to build that revolving account moving forward would be very helpful. However, that does not translate in and of itself to be supporting reducing the FTEs for FY27. So if we were to take that kind of one-time financial support from the town, we may be able to spend less of our own school department operating budget on circuit breaker and move it over to FTEs. So there is an indirect way to support the impact in lowering the impact on how many staff we have to reduce. And then there was also a discussion at the table yesterday about just providing $1.5 million of free cash that appears to be remaining in the town's budget to put into the operation stabilization account, and then use that as the mechanism to provide more than the $700,000 allocated to operating and increase that number to a higher amount. that amount would go to the schools in the town. So there's different ways that the money could be coming to the schools for support. We appreciate the creativity in the partnership with Nick and his team. Both of those mechanisms result in relief for the school department's budget that we've been advocating for 27. And I think that I know that we're trying to get a meeting with Nick tomorrow to kind of solidify that. It's really important for us to make sure that whatever we're doing, we're saying it out loud, that this is how we're going to approach relief to the school department's budget, either through a one-time support for a circuit breaker, which could reduce our need to fill that line and we could support staff, or have it come right through the stabilization operating account, which to me seems the most transparent way to do it. The town can actually see the free cash go into that account, and the town administrator can physically show how much of that account he's using for supporting the operating budget for town and schools next year. And where we want to continually unpack both of those options, and we want the school committee's kind of guidance on which one you would prefer and the pros and cons of that. The pros and cons of the one-time money is that it supports very needed line that needs to be improved. Again, 3.1 is the guidance, 3.1 million. We have $4,000 in the account. So that's a very, very big help that we're welcoming, because we're trying to do that on our own. But that would not be any sustainable increase in our budget over time. That would be a one-time infusion. If the money came through the stabilization operating account, that will be part of our increase of our operating budget moving forward. But the amounts might be different. So there's going to be some decision making about, what's best for the town, what's best for the schools, and how do we want that forward for the schools. We feel confident that we are moving our revolving accounts forward in the way that we as a team of finance subcommittee school committee members have been working. So we feel confident that we are trying to keep away from spending in the transportation revolving account, the athletic revolving account, and the special education revolving accounts the best we can. But any help in that direction would be better for our balance sheet as a school department. We have to keep in mind all lines of the budget. But we accept and we're advocating for either one of those to be helpful, and we'll continue to advocate. But your guidance on that would be helpful from a town perspective, more important for a school perspective.
Okay.
Well, might be a basic, might be a basic question. And this is not saying I don't agree with it. I just want to understand the ramifications. So anytime we take free cash, or that comes in and it goes towards the operating budget, that then carries forward the next year. Does it does it artificially grow the budget? Am I asking? So because then next year, that's money that we got that we need to then budget for. And if the amount is less, say the town finances are different next year, and if it was, I'm going to pick a number, $500,000 that was allocated, but next year they don't have that 500, we've built the budget based on that 500. So I just, so
it's definitely in a very direct way, we're indirectly using one-time money to support ongoing operational costs. So that's the negative side of that story. The positive side of the story, this is just John Phelan's opinion, is that when the creativity and the experience to put that account in place gives the town administrator and the town the lever to decide if it's 1 million in 1 year because it's going to be challenging in that year, and maybe it's only 500,000 in another year. So it allows a really healthy lever in order to balance the operational needs of the schools in the town forward. One of the suggestions at the meeting was to say, if that 1.5 is from free cash is dedicated to that account, we should actually space out the payments for the next 4 years. If we plan on having an override 4 years from now, we put that 1.5 million into that account. The balance would be 3.5 plus 1.5 is 5 million total. How do we want to allocate that over the next 4 fiscal years? And so we know what that revenue line, what that source looks like. So in that way, we would be looking at a 4-year stability viewpoint strategically, but then we would have a really big mountain to climb at the end of those 4 years, which we will regardless. So I think both of those options are really flexible and good thinking for us to do as a town, but it's good for the schools.
Could I ask a follow-up question? So I guess the follow-up question is, and keeping in mind town select board policy around the use of it, is that enough? Could more go towards it, recognizing that this was a budget built on 3%? And so do we feel like we would actually need more of that to carry us through the 4 years, and do they have flexibility to go? I don't know, or is that?
Well, the 1.5 is just what they currently have non-allocated towards capital, towards
That's the
reserve
fee amount
accounts,
they-
towards their free cash policy where they have to maintain 10% of it. Yeah, so I think what the town administrator told us that is all the free cash that is like not already kind of allocated. Because the 1.5 is on. Yeah, it's unclear how much that 1.5 divvied up over 4 years would change the long-term projection for revenue the schools or town departments would receive. How much that would allow us to change it from 3% to something higher, more reflective of the historical school department increases. It helps, it's better than zero, obviously,
Absolutely.
but it's not, it doesn't solve it. And I don't think, just to be clear too, all of these are great developments and how we're cutting. We don't at this point have an updated figure of what the town is asking the schools to cut at this point. Different from the 2.1 million. We're hoping that some of these things will shrink that, but we do not have an updated number at this point that we're working towards.
Is that meeting, is there timing on when?
So
Is that today?
we hope to have that meeting.
Sorry.
We hope to have that meeting tomorrow, if not Monday, because of scheduling conflicts. But we think it's really important for a lot of reasons that we come to closure on what those amounts might be and the mechanics of that for FY27, so we can actually build the budget and finalize the budget for that. We don't want to put out reductions until we actually have a hard number, because we don't want to put out positions that might not be reduced. But it might have to get to that point where we need to put the budget out with more names than needed. We would prefer to reduce the budget impact on our staff as much as we can before the public. And just to say out loud that this is an FY27 conversation, it's melting into a 27 and beyond question. I think we really need to take a hard look at whether or not the school department can be adequately funded with a 3% expense projection over time. I don't think that framework works for schools. I don't think that it will result in good things for the schools moving forward. And I think that that's a bigger question that we need to have a harder discussion about with the town and the warrant committee about what is a framework or revenue expenses for the town side of the schools. And is 3% an appropriate amount? We did some discussion here last week at this table, kind of at a high level modeling what that would mean. That would be the reduction this year and also about 11 people a year for the next 4 years. Again, high level. That's not sustainable from a teaching and learning perspective for a school department. So I think that we need to figure out a way to calibrate for FY27 and advocate as best we can. And we need to then start the longer conversation about what 3% is an appropriate expense year over year expectation. And I had assumed from the school side, my answer would be that's not sufficient.
Nathan? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, thank you. Totally agree with you, John. I don't think a 3% increase to our expenditures would be a school district that our town would be terribly proud of, or one that would sustain our property values. I have a question about the nutrition revolving account, using some of that funding to pay for health insurance costs. I am assuming, just wanted to test my assumptions here. I'm assuming that the budget impact from doing that is relatively modest. And I'm assuming that this is a one-time solution because the revolving account has excess funding, not a long-term solution. Could you just tell me if I'm right on those assumptions?
The balance in the food service account can support the expense of health insurance. We have not discussed whether that's an expectation moving forward or not. My assumption is that it is an expense that will be part of that moving forward. And part of the reason why we can do that is because of Katie's ability. If we do that for one federal revolving account, we have to do that for all federal revolving accounts. So that's why we took our Unit D members out of the federal grant that we got, and we added contracted service and tuitions expenses to that, so we don't have to do that for all people coming out of that account. That would be a revolving account. So the answer is yes, it has the balance that can sustain it. And yes, it is our expectation in terms of our discussions with Nick that it would be something that would be in place in the all future years. Is that
Okay.
Is that your?
Yes.
We've sort of modeled that out over in perpetuity and feel comfortable with that.
Yes.
Yes, the food service account is a healthy account, and
Okay.
it's very challenging to access it in any other way to support other functions of the school. This is one way that could happen.
Okay. And then if we put that in place, where do the savings from that accrue? Do those sort of go back to the town and are then allocated proportionally based on whatever we would think, or do they accrue to the school district?
They go back to the big bucket of insurance and come back to us in the proportionate way that the budget's done.
Yes. Health insurance is a shared cost, so it would essentially reduce that shared cost line that is shown under the town budget. And then that reduction would just be parsed out.
So in the short sense, it doesn't feel like it's adequate, that it's not the same proportional. We don't get the proportional increase back to us, but it does reduce the shared cost of the town. Nick states that they're doing the same on their side. If there's any insurance costs based on federal grants, they're going to reduce those as well. I don't even think he has like one employee. For us, it's more like 10. The other account that they asked us to explore is community schools. And when we do the same exercise for community schools, the answer is no, we don't have a sufficient balance to have insurance charged to that. And no, we don't feel like we can move it forward in the same way. So we'll be writing a memo to Nick just to codify this in writing, that this is the insurance request that he asked. This is what we believe we can do in order to reduce health insurance costs with food service. And we do not feel we can do it at this time with the community schools.
Okay, thank you.
To address your question of which strategy to move forward with, I think having some information on what the two, to your point, like the two dollar scenarios are in those, the one-time, funds, then could be used to support a one-time increase in the building up the super big reserve, which is obviously a stated priority of ours, which would then reduce the year building within the budget to help do that on a slower basis over time. That the ability to still address that while and decreasing the impact on funding gap for FY27 would be great. I probably prefer theoretically, again without numbers, to moving the stuff for the operating reserve account, just because I think to your point that it's a cleaner process. I think it's also to create more sustainability. This is what we do through a budget scenario on an annual basis. And take the free cash we can. To the point you made, I was made in the budget coordination committee by Roy Walker, like spacing that out over time so that it is a sustainable and not use of free cash. That is a good practice and how we should be thinking about that. So theoretically, that idea and plan, I think it's probably the better one for the town as a whole.
It's more transparent. It's right in front of everybody. This is where the money goes from free cash to this account and then back to the
Yeah, it's just, again, if ultimately they're going to give us $100,000 from that scenario, but they give us $1 million for the circuit breaker reserve, that's obviously a huge difference, and a huge difference in the impact of FY27. So I don't anticipate the scenarios being that diverse, but divergent, but that is my only hesitation with like having some numbers from the town administrator on what could this mean. Yes.
For the circuit breaker account, I think putting money into that account to reestablish that balance, we've talked about that a lot. That's what we really have been working towards. If the town was funding into that account, I think the intent was to relieve some of that pressure of the work that we're doing in the school department. But my only hesitation is it truly is one time. It's a one-time deposit. And so if we make a corresponding adjustment on the school department side to say, okay, the town has put X amount of money into the circuit breaker account. So that will essentially lessen how much money we as a school department are putting into that account. That is going to have an impact on our ability to build up that account in future fiscal years.
Yeah.
Because if we want to restart that cycle of trying to build up that balance, that's going to have an impact on the operating budget that is going to increase our ask to the town. So I just worry about the mechanics of that in future fiscal years. And I think we just need to be mindful of that as we talk about kind of like what goal are we trying to achieve? We're trying to achieve building up that account. And I think that work can still continue, but instead of it being a 3 to 5 year process, it's going to have to be a 5 to 7 year process.
Well, I think that I appreciate that. That would be a concern of mine, right? And that's that we, and some information I'd like to see. I mean, I think if we are building it up quicker on the front end with this allocation, and that slows what we need to do on the back end to still kind of meet our 5 year time horizon to get there, there's nothing the town is going to do that's going to prevent us from needing to retain some ongoing funding to build that account, because as you said, it's a $3 million gap right now. Town does not have $3 million free cash.
Right.
They're not even going to give us the full 1.5 million to go into this account. So we're not going to get halfway there. So yes, to your point, we are still going to need a mechanism that allows us to build this up within that time horizon. So I think that's part of the analysis that, as you get firmer numbers from the town administrator, would be helpful for us. So we still meet that budget priority.
And I want to say, because I know these meetings are taped, why, the question might be, why is that important now? Why are we worrying about that, right? We're worrying about that because we are a $74 million organization that has a unbalanced balance sheet. Our balance sheet, even after the override, was that we had reserves that should be at 3.1 just in this one account, and we had $4,000 in it. We had revolving accounts in other parts of our organization that also had those revolving accounts depleted. So we are internally trying to increase and better the position of the school department's overall balance sheet, so we can know fiscally that we can plan moving forward to be able to spend things on teachers and curriculum and professional development and not have to worry about these parts of our balance sheet, because they're important to the other pieces of our work of teaching and learning, professional development, and staffing. Because if any of those expenses and those revolving accounts spike in any one year, which they do, that's why they're in place and that's why the government says you should have them. These are the shock absorber that allows you to pay those bills and not impact the general budget for teaching and learning at the time. It is essential for us to be a healthy organization from a balance sheet perspective. And the override was an incredibly helpful tool in order to get most of our budget in place. These pieces were not in place. So we are trying to do that internally. Would also, anytime a free cash number comes up that's high, if the town wants to support that by putting deposits into that, we'll accept it. But we also want to balance our ability to do this moving forward. We will not be a healthy organization until we have a full balance sheet in place that is sustainable and has the amounts in place that support the functioning of the Milton Public Schools moving forward.
Yeah,
And that's a behind the scenes conversation that's hard for a parent of a third grader or a parent of a ninth grader, but it's the reality. We are here in this year because that balance sheet wasn't balanced for the last 4 or 5 years. And we're trying to reallocate and reset.
It creates a lot of risk for us as an organization, but not just for the schools, for the town. Because the schools can't balance our budget like last year. We need to go through the town, and that has the ability to negatively impact other departments.
That's correct.
We cannot do that. And so we saw what the impact was in terms of teachers not having paper and like couldn't do all kinds of things last year, and the concern that raised just because of the situation. So that level of risk is, in my mind, not acceptable.
And then from a business, that's the business view. From a teaching and learning view, when we hire a new superintendent, we want to be able to say to them, we want you to learn what works in Milton, what needs to improve, what the next steps are. And you want to be able to give them the tools to be able to go out and do that, because you don't want them to have to worry about the money and whether we have enough money in those accounts to do that work. So this is really about stabilizing the balance sheet in order to provide the flexibility for a new superintendent to come in and begin that next process of how they want to move the district forward and have the funding to be thinking forward. It's hard to plan for the next 3 to 5 years when you don't have enough money for next year. So this is a real, it impacts strategy for teaching and learning, and it impacts students when it's not done well. And I think we've already learned that the hard way, and I think we're trying to reset that whole process.
Nathan?
I don't have anything. Sorry, I didn't mean to. Did I make noise or something?
Oh, you have your hand raised.
Oh no, I think it was raised from before. I'm in agreement with this conversation. Don't have anything to add.
Great. Okay, so our ongoing next steps with the town administrators, y'all are meeting with them tomorrow. We'll continue. I guess the one of the pieces I just wanted to name that we talked about last time, which was the division of the funding, the revenue gap the town has, the 84 to 16% the school is saying. We've raised that with the select board and the town administrator. At this point, at least hearing their one meeting on it and having some indirect conversations, I haven't heard traction gained on that path. That I assume is that something we can continue to just raise with the town administrator of the next conversation. Yeah, so that's disappointing because that would obviously help as we're trying to do this. These other pieces help too, and so appreciate their collaboration in these other areas. But
yeah, I mean, I think so. The areas of the influx areas, I think we should continue to ask about and talk about and push on and partner on is how the infusion can come back to the schools, whether it's through the stabilization account or through one-time support for a circuit breaker. It is the breakdown of whatever the gap is. The 80% versus the 20%, we're taking 80% of that hit, and why. I think the town administrator has been very clear about that. And also, are we always going to be able to, is the town's budget moving forward always going to be the exact same percent increase, given the scale of the school department? I think the school department has always had a larger percentage of the budget moving forward. If we're 66% of the budget and the town's 33%, we're taking an 80% hit this year, as opposed to a 60%, 66%. And when the money comes back in, how does it come back in? So what's the proportional agreement that we have around how these influxes of money come to us and how these reductions in funds impact us? Just want, I think it's just an open conversation to have.
One of the other pieces I think that has been something that we're waiting on, information that we're waiting on to be able to figure out what the final deficit number is the state funding. And I think one of the big funding lines from the state is Chapter 70, which is funding for the schools. Right now, as an estimate, the town has built in $30 per pupil as an increase for the Chapter 70 funding. But I know with the Student Opportunity Act and in previous fiscal years, that funding has come in closer to $150 per student. So if that funding comes in at $75 per student in the governor's initial budget, that would be almost an extra $200,000 for the school. And so I think that that's information. Again, we're waiting for that to make a final decision, but a huge piece of that is the Chapter 70 funding, and that's intended for schools. So I think that's something that we should just keep an eye on. And if that helps, maybe if there's some additional money that's coming in from the state, if that can help kind of shift what the allocation of the cuts are to reduce the cuts that we're having to make from the school department, I think that that's something that we just need to consider as well. So I would just kind of bring that up with the town administrator during our conversation.
And he's obviously aware of it. We're talking about it. We spoke at our meeting yesterday that maybe next Wednesday, so that'll be part of the bigger conversation. But in terms of the public knowing what are the areas of discussion that we're trying to have and solidify, that's definitely the next one as well. And that we all, the town and the schools, want to solidify every revenue source, the mechanics of it, so we can actually understand exactly what our end number is, so we can actually formalize the formal budget request proposal for for a town meeting and for the warrant committee and for everybody in the next few weeks. So it's really important for us to have that bottom line number. It did go down from a certain number to a lower number that Nick announced yesterday. But we all, and I know Nick feels the same way, we just need to come to a decision, have these hard conversations and come to a decision so we can provide at least our major draft one full detailed budget for everybody to review and consider moving forward. This is the time of year when that needs to be ready.
Yeah, we're well past our budget calendar time, so all of this is very late, and I think that came up with the budget coordination committee. We got to figure out how to do this better next year.
And we might just so I could say the last week we went through the methodology that we're going through internally at the school department in order to how we're going to address whatever the gap is. The first thing we talked about in the gap discussion would be to we'll have a conversation at meetings like this to increase fees for athletics, transportation, facilities rental, community schools, and I believe there might be one other area that we could increase. So that's the first area that we could do some work on in order to reduce the impact on teachers. The next one is that Katie and I, Calacosa, went through the non-salary lines in order to see where we could cull some dollars there. We came up with about $200,000 worth of reductions that we can make there. But remember, those lines have meaning. So some of those dollar amounts in some of those categories, I think, were concerning to members of the school committee, and rightly so. If we don't have this much money for this need, if it arises, what will happen? We're going to just have to take it out somewhere else. So they are real reductions. They're not placeholders by any means. It's real expenses that we could incur, and then we will begin to address the FTE count in whatever that number looks like. So anything we can do to reduce that 2.1 number that we've been given to a lesser number allows us to re-strategize that process, and then we will present that as part of it. So again, having the end number in the next week or so, we can begin to have this conversation more concretely in the public about what would be impacted, what would that mean to the school district, and to what we can do and what we can't do moving forward for next year. And the reason why we can step so strongly into next year, despite these concerns, is that we have a really solid FY26 budget, and I just don't want to have it be lost on folks. We are in very good fiscal shape this year. You just saw the Q2. It's very different Q2 than was presented to you last year at this time. We are gaining fiscal stability every week and every month. This is a very good fiscal year for the Milton schools, and we want to build on this and move forward for the district.
Could I, as we talk about the process, and this is the right place to say it, I appreciate the reason for the budget coordination coming up last year. My concern is a little bit that we missed an opportunity to have meetings with the select board and the subcommittee here. I think that there's a lot of focus on that, and I just would hope next year maybe we could that they could come to our meetings early when we're having these initial budget discussions. I think that might have helped some of this. And again, I recognize the need to have these conversations happening at the townwide level. I think we could do better next year, have them sooner, a smaller focused group to discuss some of these things earlier.
I think that since that was shared a little bit on the budget coordination.
Yeah.
We get the actual school committee, select board, one committee.
Yeah.
Earlier.
Yeah.
I would have revenue projections earlier, assumptions on traffic, to the point John repeatedly of like how we these conversations in the fall. We give the school department much more time to plan and think through creatively,
right,
how to mitigate and funding gaps this year.
I think over communicating earlier is the vehicle.
One thing I know we're getting very beyond time and to the end. I'm mindful of just like the update we want to provide tonight at school committee and like answering concerns that have come up obviously from community members and just like how we continue trying to be clear within our messaging around what is happening, has happened, what's happening now, what's going to happen. So I did put together these draft slides that I shared with y'all in advance.
Can I just interrupt?
Please.
I have
Yep.
to leave at 6.
Yeah,
I haven't.
I know.
6.
So I don't know if, again, we want to delay this for a future school committee meeting. I'm again, a bit mindful of this being kind of the focus of people's attention. But I tried to put together just some questions. Again, given we have 6 minutes, I don't know if we have enough time to kind of talk this through. But at least maybe just to align on like, are these helpful questions to answer? And is there general agreement sharing this at, if not tonight, an upcoming school committee meeting? Because again, I just think about my role of providing finance committee update, and obviously I'll support with that of just like how to do that in a more visually clear manner and making sure we're kind of hitting on things that people have questions about. So these are like some questions I feel like I had heard that we had received, and then I tried to go through them with a slide for
Each one.
each one to answer them.
So fortunately, I've been able, I have pre-scheduled PTO meetings. So I've had one at Pierce, the Glover, and at the Cunningham over the last, 7 school days. And these are the questions that I think people are asking. So I think it will be really helpful to go through the Q2 tonight, talk about the big picture, replicate this conversation in a very condensed way. But I think in terms of what families and community members want to know, I think an FAQ asking the question that we've been hearing and then answering it and having it on the screen is actually helpful for folks. I think it really is a concrete way to kind of give information. So maybe we could walk through the ones that we can give very clear answers to, and to try to acknowledge and represent the conversations that we're having off camera, meaning we have PTO meetings and when people ask us in the community what's going on to best address. And then we can actually formalize these and put them in FAQ form and put them on our FY27 website that we've already created, within our school website in our finance subcommittee folder for people to view these meetings and everything else. So it might be helpful to maybe isolate some of these, Mark, that we have really clear answers to, that we can then, we don't have to do that now, but I think we put the slides up. I think it's a really nice way to give people a very clear insight into, oh, that's the question I asked and here's the answer. Because folks are asking the questions and we want to make sure it's clear. So whatever ones we think are the easiest to translate at this point, because we haven't had all the time to have the information gathered that might be helpful to more complex questions, but whatever ones we can knock off and talk about tonight, I think would be great.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the 3 of us, school committee members, can't work on this outside of this meeting collectively, but if you two can, take a look, and if there are ones that we just want to table because we don't feel like we're relying on the answer on that, or whatever I'm providing is not clear, I think that's fine. I do think, going through some of this, at least starting at tonight's meeting, and we can continue in future school committee meetings. She just made jump. So that
The families want to know if they have questions.
yeah, that's what I tried to do. Did do just put together these Excel documents. We have 2 minutes. Just again, the projected issue of this being a long-term, I want to make sure that anytime we're talking publicly to the select board, town administrator, whoever about this, the FY27 is an issue. It's a real issue. It is also an issue for FY28 and beyond. Just again, what our projected revenue is for FY27. If we only get a 3% increase, John, to your point, that's how much money we can expect for FY28. We are talking about just what standard growth is for the schools on override year. It is about 5.2%, which is what we're asking for this year. That is right in line with kind of the mean and median. We say 5%, that is the gap, and that's 20 positions. So again, I said last time, if it's 4%, obviously that cuts it down to 10. But historically, if you look at all the years of funding and take out FY26 and 18 as outlier years in the last 15 years, we're going back to 2013, the average is higher. 2012 and 2011 bring that number down significantly because they were like at 0% and then 0.92% increase. So they are also outliers. But again, just go back the last 15 years, this is the average and the median. So 5.2 is kind of right in line. So I just remain very concerned about how we change this, because 3% is not the right. It's just, it can't be the right number. Wanted to flag that at least. I know we need to move on. Our next meeting is next week. We will, on the agenda right now, have a vote on the Q2 reports. We will continue the conversation on FY27 budgets. It's kind of going to be on every meeting. We're not expecting number updates from y'all in terms of a new proposed budget, but the next draft would be still for February 11th. We have on the agenda. But things to talk about. The only other thing I'm wondering is next week, if we think we might have time to go over the revolving account policy. We've had lots of other things about Q2 and FY28, 27, I mean, but so like the Google Doc we created, of course, with some initial numbers. I don't know, Katie and John, if y'all have the opportunity to talk about that, or if not next week, I'd at least like to encourage that we talk about it on the 4th, so we try and move that policy creation, financial policy creations kind of along. Does that make sense?
Yeah, we also will have to add here at some point in the near future, the presentation of fee increases that we propose.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah. Do you want to do that next week or this?
I might have a conflict on the 4th, so we can maybe think about a different day, but the day that week. But yes, that weekend we have to also include, given the conversation we had at the larger meeting on Tuesday morning, time for all of us to meet with select board and warrant committee. Either that be a morning meeting, doesn't have to be in our time slot, it could be at night, it could be at the time when we just get everybody in front of the community and have this hard conversation. So somewhere we're gonna have to work that into the conversation as well.
I know you got to run, so. Were you? I thought the town administrator was going to work to schedule that.
Yeah, I'm just saying that out.
Yeah. But there's no action step for us around.
He is
coordinating scheduling that. Happy to help do that if that's helpful. But yeah, you can just confirm that straight.
So Q2 FY27 budget, keep in mind the conversation about revolving account policy and fee increases. Those are all active pieces that we're working through.
Great. I will take a motion to, unless there's anything else, I'll take a motion to adjourn. Second. I do a roll call because we're remote. All in favor, Nathan?
Yes.
Amanda?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Long meeting. So thank you.